On a clear September day in 2025, a large outdoor crowd gathered at Utah Valley University for a scheduled public event. The assembled students, citizens, and media expected a normal campus appearance, a speech, a few sharp questions, and the kind of heated but contained debate that has become a familiar part of American public life. Among those on stage was Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA and one of the nation's most recognizable conservative youth activists. The gathering was energetic, at times confrontational, but it was, in form and intent, a routine appearance by a controversial public figure. What happened next would shatter that routine. As the event progressed and questioners approached the microphone, the tone sharpened. A question from a student touched on the subject of mass shootings, and Kirk engaged the student in a back and forth that drew attention. In the span of minutes, a single rifle shot rang out through the courtyard. Chaos erupted. People screamed and fled. Others dropped to the ground or tried to shelter friends and strangers. First responders converged on the scene within moments. Despite immediate medical attention and frantic efforts to evacuate him, Charlie Kirk was pronounced dead at the hospital later that day. The campus was locked down. Social media erupted with footage and speculation. The killing of a public political figure on a campus stunned the nation and triggered a rapid, complex law enforcement response. From the outset, investigators treated the scene as both a homicide and a crime with potential political overtones. Surveillance cameras, by design or luck, had captured the silhouette of a lone figure moving into a vantage point, later identified as a rooftop area near the event site, and firing the shot that changed everything. Video pulled from stairwells, campus cameras, and nearby businesses created a partial visual record: a person carrying a bag, climbing to a rooftop, crossing a flat surface to an apparent firing point, and then a rapid departure, dropping from the roof and disappearing into nearby terrain. Those images became the first thread detectives would use to weave a timeline of the attack and the suspect's movements. Within hours, law enforcement described a widening manhunt. Leads multiplied quickly. Tips from civilians, images shared across social platforms, witness statements. A family friend became a crucial node in the chain, reporting remarks from someone close to them that eventually led investigators to a suspect. That person, identified publicly by authorities as 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, was located and arrested a short time later at his family home. Local and federal investigators, including the FBI, said that Robinson had, according to family accounts, told a relative he had carried out the shooting. That relative passed the information on to law enforcement, and the suspect was taken into custody after several dozen hours of searching and investigating. By the time of the formal arrest, the country had already entered a feverish period of reaction. The name of the suspect, the images from campus, and the bewildering question of motive dominated headlines.
As investigators sifted available evidence, several items complicated a neat narrative of political motive. Authorities reported that bullet casings recovered at the scene bore engraved inscriptions. The etchings included references that investigators described as drawn from internet culture, video game memes, political slogans, and other markings that at least superficially suggested a performative or symbolic element to the attack. Law enforcement sources told reporters the inscriptions included anti-fascist references and other phrases that hinted at ideological anger. But they also cautioned that the presence of engraved casings alone does not prove a specific, settled motive. Forensic teams also recovered fingerprints, shoe prints, and other traces that linked the rooftop vantage point, the path of flight, and physical objects back to the suspect and his movements. These material facts helped establish a chain of custody for the central allegation: a rooftop shooter firing from a high point into a crowd below. Investigators emphasized 2 points repeatedly. First, the suspect's motivations were still under active investigation. And second, they would not rush to fit evidence into politically convenient narratives. Utah Governor Spencer Cox and federal officials urged calm amid rising partisan rhetoric, noting that concrete motive had not been formally established and promising that federal agents would follow facts rather than assumptions. Authorities said they had interviewed family members and friends, and that some had cooperated with the investigation, while others had not. According to reporting, one close partner of the suspect, a transgender woman, provided investigators with assistance and information that helped piece together the suspect's recent behavior and state of mind. Even while such cooperation was described as helpful, officials stressed that a full understanding of why the attack occurred would require more time, more interviews, and the eventual processing of digital and forensic evidence. Political leaders, public intellectuals, and media producers immediately reacted on multiple fronts. Condemnations of the killing came quickly from across the political spectrum. In public statements, some leaders called for cooler heads and a renewed commitment to responsible political rhetoric. Others used the incident to underscore broader debates about safety at public events, campus security practices, and the alarming rise in politically motivated violence in recent years. Some conservative leaders and commentators urged restrictions on the speed at which the media and social platforms raced to judgment, while others focused on the cultural drivers they believed created environments prone to radicalization. The net effect was an intense national conversation conducted simultaneously on cable news, social platforms, and in municipal forums, a conversation that mixed grief, anger, political critique, and the kind of speculative analysis that fills early news cycles when official facts remain incomplete. To understand how a single act of lethal violence could occur within minutes at a public campus event, investigators looked for both the specific and the structural. On the specific side were the technical details, how rooftop access had been gained, whether the vantage point provided a clear line of sight to the stage, the type of firearm used and its range, the presence or absence of security measures, and the timeline of the shooter's approach and exit. Security footage and witness accounts described a person moving into position and firing from a high angle, a position that gave a clear view of a crowded stage, but also required premeditation and logistical planning to access and to depart unobserved. The weapon reportedly seized at the suspect's residence, a Mauser bolt-action rifle, suggested an older, single-shot capable platform, not an automatic blow-by-blow weapon, but one nonetheless easily lethal at the distances described. On the structural side were questions about radicalization, online communities, and how a relatively young person in 2025 might move from private grievance into public violence. Law enforcement officials and public health experts frequently point to a complex interaction of influences: the echo chambers of social media, the acceleration of grievance narratives, mental health challenges, and the amplification of extremist rhetoric. In this case, reporting indicated the suspect had expressed strong disdain for the target's political stances, and investigators said the suspect's online footprint included references to anti-conservative content and to forums where anger can be echoed and intensified. The suspect's family background, academic path, and personal relationships, including a partner who is transgender, also became focal points for reporters attempting to map motive and influence. Yet authorities stressed the importance of resisting hasty causal links. Individuals radicalize for different reasons, and many people who consume extreme content never commit violent acts. Establishing legal culpability requires not just context, but evidence of intent, planning, and action. The arrest set in motion the wheels of criminal process. Prosecutors from the county and federal authorities coordinated to determine charges, considering state murder statutes and the possibility of federal charges if the attack was tied to hate crime elements or interstate conspiracy. The suspect was booked and held without bail. Mental health screenings were reported, and authorities said the suspect was not initially cooperative with investigators. When suspects do not speak with police, prosecutors still can proceed on corroborating physical and digital evidence, witness statements, surveillance footage, forensic links, and admissions to third parties, and those elements became central to the state's case. Courts moved to schedule initial appearances, and public officials signaled that due process must take its course, even as the public demanded answers. The public media landscape shaped and was shaped by how the story evolved. Early moments of the story were dominated by raw footage, shaky cell phone clips of the single gunshot, audio of frightened shouts, and snapshots of a chaotic evacuation. Cable networks parsed the image of the suspect and family history. Social platforms amplified fragments and claims, some accurate and some unverified. Misinformation and rumors spread alongside verified reporting, a phenomenon common in high-profile cases where the appetite for instant explanation outpaces official channels. Newsrooms raced to verify timelines and to attach credible sources to every assertion. In many cases, over time, reporting converged on a consistent sequence: a campus event, a rooftop shooter, a rapid manhunt, a tip from a close acquaintance, and an arrest at a family residence. Still, as is common in complex criminal investigations, the full evidentiary narrative that will be used at trial, the forensic reports, the chain of custody for evidence, the social media content, and witness testimony remained a work in progress. Beyond the immediate criminal case, the killing reopened questions about public safety planning for events where political speech and campus life intersect. Universities and event planners began reviewing protocols: perimeter control, elevated sightlines, rooftop access, and pre-event security sweeps. Organizers of public forums examined whether metal detectors or bag checks should become standard at high-profile campus appearances, and law enforcement officials discussed the trade-offs: how to preserve open discourse while protecting speakers and audiences. In the months after the shooting, many campuses increased visible security at major events, and federal agencies offered guidance on best practices for large public gatherings. Critics, however, warned against a security creep that could chill speech or normalize heavily fortified campus environments. The cultural and political fallout echoed more broadly. Some commentators framed the assassination as a symptom of a polarized media environment that often reduces complex issues to provocative soundbites. Others saw it as proof of a perverse feedback loop in which extreme speech begets extreme action. Still others cautioned against reducing the event to a single cause. Violence is multi-causal, and each instance requires careful study to unpack individual pathology, social networks, and available triggers. For the families of the victim and the accused, the public debates offered little comfort. Their lives were pulled into a national argument about political rhetoric, safety, and the role of digital culture in fomenting violence. Legal experts watching the case also highlighted evidentiary and constitutional questions likely to surface. If prosecutors sought to introduce the suspect's online statements or the inscriptions on the bullet casings as evidence of motive, defense counsel would likely challenge admissibility and argue for context. The defense would be expected to probe the reliability of witness recollection, surveillance footage interpretation, and the chain of custody on physical evidence. Mental health evaluations could produce contested expert testimony about the defendant's state of mind, and that in turn might influence potential pleas or the timing of a trial. Observers predicted a lengthy pre-trial period as prosecutors prepare a comprehensive case, and the defense explores the available options under state and federal law. A tragic long-term consequence of events like this is the way they reconfigure civic rituals. Memorial services, vigils, and public statements marked the immediate aftermath. Some political allies of Charlie Kirk organized commemorations and vowed to continue his agenda. Opponents expressed sorrow and called for cooling of political rhetoric on all sides. National leaders urged restraint and promised investigations. Civil society groups urged commitment to preventing future violence through mental health investments, community dialogue, and targeted interventions for at-risk individuals. The funeral and memorial events, covered widely by the press, became moments for collective grief and national reflection, even as they fueled renewed debate.
While the arrest of a suspect answered one immediate question, whether law enforcement could locate and detain a person linked to the shooting, it did not close the larger inquiry. Why did this happen? That question proved more slippery than any single arrest. Motive, in criminal law and in public understanding, is rarely a function of single causes. Rather, motive sits at the nexus of biography, ideology, opportunity, and sometimes pathology. In the Robinson case, public reporting suggested a mix of ideological anger, fractured identity, and online echo chambers. But officials also emphasized that the defendant had not cooperated with investigators and that motive remained officially unproven. Much of the public speculation, vigorous and visceral, would have to stand aside as courts and forensic experts compiled a record of proof. As the legal process moved forward, journalists and researchers continued to probe deeper questions. What role did social media communities play in amplifying grievances? How did campus security protocols fail or succeed? What could be done to detect signs that a person was moving from grievance to violent planning? Policymakers debated possible responses, from stricter firearms regulations to improved mental health services and better monitoring of extremist online activity. Civil liberties advocates cautioned against sweeping surveillance measures. Community groups pushed for targeted, evidence-based interventions that respect privacy while trying to prevent violence before it occurs. Ultimately, the Charlie Kirk killing became a touchstone for national anxieties. It forced a reckoning with the reality that political violence could erupt in public forums once thought safe. It raised questions about the responsibilities of public figures and platforms, and it demanded that society consider how to balance freedom of expression with public safety. For the families, for the campus community, and for the country, the work of healing and understanding would require more than instant commentary. It would require rigorous investigation, public-spirited reforms, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about polarization and the paths to violence. The case, as of this account, remained active. Formal charges were pending, and the suspect awaited arraignment. Officials continued to collect and analyze evidence, prosecutors prepared what they described as a methodical case, and the public, already polarized, braced for months of legal proceedings and political debate. Journalists promised to follow the court process, to scrutinize the evidence, and to separate rumor from verified fact as best as possible. The nation watched and waited for the next chapter in a story that had been written in shock and grief, a historical moment that would be studied for years as both a criminal case and a cautionary tale about modern public life.